Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this morning on our webinar for Gotham Technology Group on incident response and what we can do to bring that together. So happy to see you guys all on. This is I'm Ken Phelan, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Gotham. So I run our professional services group as well as some of the things, product selection, some of the other things we do from a technology strategy perspective in the firm. I'm home like everybody else right now, sporting my COVID haircut. This is my second COVID haircut. My wife's been working on this, so I hope that if anyone wants to comment on the webinar or on my haircut, my wife would be glad to get those responses. I'm going to start by having everybody introduce themselves down the line here and just kind of talk about who they are in their position. So on my screen, I've got Brian first. So Brian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. This is Brian Wagner. I'm a principal architect with Gotham Technology Group. I've actually been with the company 20 years and focus a lot on infrastructure space.
Thanks, Brian. Bert?
My name is Bert Amador. I've been with Gotham since November. Prior to that, I was with City 22 years, and I'm a principal architect here, specializing in the security space.
All right, thanks, Bert. Steve, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Steve Stasiconis, Managing Partner, Secure Network. Been a pen tester, incident response company for 23 years now.
Well, thanks, Steve. And Bob, how about you?
I'm Bob Sitzik. I'm the Director of IT Operations and Infrastructure for B&G Foods, a food manufacturer headquartered in New Jersey, Parsippany, New Jersey.
Terrific. Thanks, Bob. So our goal here is to go through some of the incident response structures, what we can do to be ready for incident response, get some feedback from the experts, get some feedback from people who have been in the trenches, and then take some time afterwards and answer some of your questions. So with that, let's jump into it. So, let's just get right in the moment here. Like, there's a moment when, as a customer, you discover, or as anybody on the planet right now, you discover you've been breached, and you find out that you've been breached. So, how does that happen? Like, and I'll go backwards this time. I'll start with Bob. Like, I know you've been breached a couple times. Like, what is that? What is that moment? How did you find out? How do you find out? And what's your first reaction to that moment?
Yes. So we did have two incidents. One involved an acquisition where we were in the middle of an acquisition, and we were informed, during a transition. A TSA period where we were co-managing the network. We were informed from the company that we acquired. So we were kind of in the dark on that one, but we had to take some precautions on our side. So we upped like our patching. We upped. This was a ransomware type of situation. It was pretty tough, but we worked with that. Organization to get through the transition. The one that I'm more intimate with, if you will, is the breach that actually occurred in our network. The way I found out about it was it was during the summer. I was traveling a lot. A lot of people were on vacation. There was anonymous things going on. Blue screens on older operating systems. Services that would stop running, things that, sometimes like older systems, we chalked it up to, sometimes we have to reboot something, restart a service, things like that. Then the fact that everybody was we didn't have our full staff, maybe people were looking at it as hard, then it just got to be too much. It got to a threshold where I thought, there's something really going on here that let me see. If there's something larger going on. So we literally, it was like a Friday evening. We started looking at all the servers. We noticed things like our antivirus had been kind of disassembled. All the services were blocked. We were using Sophos, and it just got taken apart by this Imitet, delivered by TrickBot. That was the exploit there. Probably came in some malware that came in an email, that somebody clicked on a link, and it probably was around for a while until it could move laterally. It got some privileged accounts. So the scope of it, as we started looking at more and more things, we'd try to patch a server, it would get reinfected. I cleaned some up, it would get reinfected. Then I realized, wow, this is big. It's affecting hundreds of servers. We shut them all down. So I knew what I was dealing with. We shut down the environment and then tried to protect our backups and some things that I had learned from the other incident, where they actually went after the backup servers. So that's how we found out some things weren't even taking patches and for blue screens and things. So
that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, Steve, you're one of the people Gotham calls when they're seeing stuff. I mean, you guys are at the center of this as a company that does a lot of IR, and you're that first call a lot. I mean, so make that broader. I mean, from your perspective, how do customers generally find out they've been breached? I mean, what are some of the things that kind of get them in that mode?
It's interesting. Number one, the calls always come in like on a Friday before a holiday, a long weekend, anything to ruin your time off. Clearly, Bob, it happened to you on Friday, right? So once again, your weekend's shot. But it's interesting. The other thing we noticed is it's from the typical locked up system with ransomware. That's what we always see. It's like, well, somebody can't get use of a critical system. But the other ones that are interesting are the ones when somebody calls in and says, I've got a bunch of new accounts in Active Directory, and I don't think these people work here. So that's always an interesting thing. The other thing that's happening is when they say, we've had some wires that left our company that clearly weren't initiated by us. But probably the worst thing that we hear from somebody that gets breached is when they say, our customers are telling accounts receivable we've already been paid. And that's when something bad went down, where your threat actor took control of probably somebody's mail, had sent out communication indicating to pay an invoice to another location or to another wire location, and that's a hard thing to deal with. So those are the ones that clearly stick out in my mind. But the last one, paying somebody else is a really difficult thing to go through. Very difficult.
Yeah. You just can't get those wires back. I mean, once that's left, there's no way getting that back. I'm gonna skip over to Brian just because I know you as the infrastructure guy on this cyber conversation, Brian, you get a lot of those first calls from our customers because you're just like that trusted source. I mean, so from your perspective, like how does that happen when you get that first call?
I mean, it could be as innocent as a hey, my email's down, right? We've had calls like that. Hey, it's weird, someone opened up a support ticket, email's down, right? And then we go in and take a look at things, and that might be what they see or feel, but in reality, it's much bigger, right? There's a text file on the desktop or something that's already showing signs of ransomware or some type of issue. It could be user side issue of just, hey, for some reason it's, I'm getting an error message doing X, Y, Z, right? And then when we dig into it, it's actually a lot bigger. So, a lot of these things, are most likely start at the user side, right? And there's something that took place there. As Steve mentioned, we do see, the couple calls that we've gotten are not, middle of the day type stuff. It's more like something happened in the middle of the night or a weekend or something, and we wake up to, or somebody putting a ticket late at night and saying, hey, maybe go check the email or something. So it's at a time where maybe they're trying to, it seems like they're trying not to have a lot of exposure to what they're doing, right? They're trying to spread as fast as possible, and to do that at a time where people, hopefully a lot of people don't notice what's happening, and they don't, and it might look like something small when in reality it's something bigger. So some, those are kind of some of the areas that we've hit, whether it's a user calling their help desk and just escalating to us, or it seems like maybe a system is down, or just the first thing that they notice is email, often because that's the first thing, when you're not logged in, you still always have access to email. So if you haven't had an email in a while, you start to question, is my email working, things like that. So sometimes those are the first signs.
Yeah, it's sometimes hard to tell a bug from a hack, like this is just bad system behavior, or might truly been turned over.
Yep.
Interesting.
What we were experiencing, we thought they were just a collection of things that were just behaving badly, not part of like one larger issue.
Exactly. I think it's trying to, just understand, we'll get into some of that, but just scope, right? right? Understanding the scope of things. When you first get that first call, you're not thinking immediately that this is, this is ransomware or this is some kind of crazy malware. And as you start to realize the scope, then your whole mindset changes. And I think those are some of those indicators early on help you. If you can see them earlier, they help you, down the road.
No, awesome. All right, I'm going to launch our first poll question. Then I'm going to ask Bert like a much bigger, harder question. So Bert, get ready. Our poll question is going up. It's, have you ever been breached or had an incident? So if you can take a moment and answer that question, then I'll bring it down. But Bert, while they're answering that question, listen, I think there's a larger problem here. I think generally speaking, a lot of people who have not been breached just don't understand their risk for breach. Right? They don't see the problem. They're sort of in a can't happen to me perspective. So you're a cyber professional with a long time on this side. Like, how do you create an appropriate sense of risk for the business when they've never been breached before?
Well, the first thing about creating a sense of risk is having a plan, analyzing what your exposure is, what your critical resources are, and creating a plan on how to respond. You got to have well-defined roles. When a breach is detected by whichever the methods that were mentioned by everyone else, or worst case scenario, finding your data on the internet because it was exfiltrated as part of a breach. Everybody must know what their role is. And the only way to do that is to plan well ahead. Identify the roles, who is going to do what, who's going to isolate your systems, who's going to get a hold of your incident response company, and hopefully you have one in retainer. You don't have to go to Dr. Google to figure out who you're going to call. Who's going to get in touch with the authorities or your lawyers and your insurance company. All of those roles have to be defined ahead of time. And then have a plan. What do we do when the worst happens? What are our first steps? How do we go about doing that? And once you have a well thought out plan with well-defined roles, practice that plan. Don't wait till it actually happens to make sure that everybody knows their roles and understands what needs to happen when. That plan has to be practiced. And a good way of doing that is tabletop exercises. Schedule them at least once a quarter, I would say. In some cases, that's not possible, but not less than twice a year. And run through your scenarios, run through your plan. Best if you run through those scenarios unannounced and make sure that everybody responds and understands their role. And then write down your lessons learned during that tabletop scenario, make corrections, and then test it again.
No, I love that answer. I definitely, we did some tabletop exercises on business continuity at Gotham, just parenthetically, just prior to this whole COVID thing, like in the February timeframe, and having the executives as part of that conversation really gets them into the drama of that moment. Like, they start to understand what's going on, and having the senior executives be part of those test plans absolutely kind of communicates like what it's going to be like and what our capabilities are. I mean, I don't know, Bob, did you have a difference in your organization, do you think, kind of before and after your first incident, or in terms of how you talk to your managers?
Yes, everything that Bert said is absolutely correct. Forming that communication chain is something that I learned that during that incident. I kind of, as a technologist, I wanted to just like get right in and just start cleaning things up, and again, like you said, like even isolating, setting up these like VLANs and things like that to isolate so we weren't getting reinfected. There was a lot of like confusion and contention, within my group, the infrastructure application side, and leadership. People were scrambling, and the incident response team that I used, that practice, they were emphasizing the communication piece, and I probably wasn't listening to it as much. I wanted to go right into firefighting mode, and then I had to take a step back a couple days later, and say, yeah, you're right. Let's set this this communication chain up, because we found that things were going south. We had a plan, but maybe it was the image, like 300 laptops or something, and we were bringing in people to help us do that, and then somebody would not communicate the correct thing, and the people would come in and start taking their laptops with them and things like that. It was quite chaotic the first couple of days, because we did not formally put that into practice. So hopefully it's something that we're just now looking at the tabletop exercises and trying to get that sponsorship from leadership. It's sometimes not as easy as you would think. You think everyone would be a believer just going through it, but it's amazing to me how quickly sometimes that memory fades. So you really need to keep that in the forefront, and those exercises are probably the only way to do that while people still remember how catastrophic that was for the business.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I'm going to share this the poll results, and while I do that, I'm going to ask Steve a question, because I know one of the problems I have as a professional talking to clients about this is trying to nail down, like, well, what are the chances it's really going to happen to me? What are the chances if it hasn't happened? Is it going to happen? Am I too small to have it happen to me? If I've been hacked, am I going to get hacked again? I mean, and I know, Steve, you and I have discussed this. So what do you think about how do you communicate to customers about, because no one reports, right? Very, very few attacks are actually public. There's no public data on this. So how do you communicate to customers?
When they get hacked, or what if they're thinking about when it's going to happen?
If they're thinking about what the chances of it happening, like, is there a 50% chance of being hacked, a 20% chance? Like, when you're talking these preparedness things, I think a lot of people don't think it can happen, but it's obviously a percentage game. How do you talk about the percentage chances of being hacked for an organization, like, as a risk percentage?
Yeah, the risk is super high. In fact, we talked to an FBI agent about some of the issues they're seeing as well. And it's not a matter of, I guess the percentages are more in the favor of, you're going to get hacked, you just don't when. You just don't know when it's going to occur. And it could happen from a variety of different vectors that are out there right now. So listening to what Bert says about testing and being prepared and everything that you also mentioned is really kind of like, that's paramount. That has to happen. It's the percentages are so high now. The technologies are great. They do a good job, but the path of least resistance is a user. And unfortunately, training users is a tough thing, and getting them to listen, and they make mistakes. And, a human mistake turns out it can be catastrophic. So the problem is, today's world, it's like, it's a matter of when, and, understanding about what you're going to do when that happens is going to be something you really got to be prepared for. And I agree with everything Bert had to say,
Yeah.
Those tabletops and purple team exercises, you got to do them. You really have to.
Yeah. There's just a lot of ways the attack can happen. I think, trying to not get attacked is one thing, but trying to respond and be resilient is another thing. And I think that's something we talk a lot about, especially in this concept, right? And there's a comment in one of the chat boxes here about that. If you don't think you've never been attacked, you probably just don't know that you were attacked, or to the extent you are attacked. So, there's a lot of that stuff going on. So in terms of this concept of resilience, I mean, I'll call Steve and Brian this. I mean, we're in the front lines, the first people to walk in. There's a thing like, what is it you're looking for that okay, this customer is going to be resilient. They're going to come back from this. They've got this stuff. I mean, what is resilience to you, and what do you hope customers have when you walk through the door that makes you think, okay, this is going to be a good one, not a bad one? I'll start with Steve on that later, since you were just talking.
A little bit of, just simple things like, if they've been logging activity, it's like the clue to the crime. Watching the threat actor move through a network and where he's gone and what he's done, then it will help you determine where patient zero is. That's the key thing. So if you're logging data, if you had a SIM that's up and running, or some sort of other device that collects events, that's like one of the key things behind that. And then documenting the processes of of what you guys have in place for backups or disaster recovery to, like, recover a system that was been breached and been ransomed, and then understanding about, okay, well, this isn't as bad as it was. At least we can recover. There's too many places that don't document anything. There's too many places that don't event log. There's too many places that really realize, oh yeah, we should have done that, but we didn't do it. I really think that exercising due diligence beforehand and understanding the weakness to a system or to a solution that you rolled out to your company or your workforce is really important. So companies that don't have anything are the ones that I fear the most. The folks that, take the time and the effort, they know there's risk out there, but they're at least prepared for it. Those are the ones I feel, okay, well, this isn't going to be so bad. These guys will recover. So unfortunately, there's people that still pay a huge price in today's world.
It's tough without a good EDR system and logs, and that you're deploying and trying to figure out where that is. So Brian, on your side, from a remediation standpoint, you're trying to get them back in business, get the AD back, get the machines back. What parts of resilience kind of draw your attention?
Sure. I think some of this has changed over time with I'd say the people building these malware and ransomware are getting more creative on what they attack, because they know they want to break down your resiliency, right? So I think it's looking at, when it comes to storage is a big layer, right? This is where your data is. This is, kind of where the keys to the kingdom are for everything that they want to go after. So, what can be done to make that a little bit easier to recover in the event that it happens, right? It's assume it's going to happen. So if it's going to happen, what do we do? Snapshots on the SAN itself is very effective to recover quickly. Part of this is, can you recover? And also part of it is how fast would it be to recover, right? Using those structures. A lot of people have backups in place. Have they been tested? What's the process look like? Are you on disk or tape? How long does it take? Do you have storage to support the restores? Because a lot of times you need to leave the dirty stuff there, all right, and be able to keep it for forensics purposes, even if you're going to recover. So you might need, excess storage to be able to recover and still keep that kind of pristine-ish, if you want to call that pristine environment that's dirty, so that people like Steve can go in and figure out, what happened, right? So I think there's layers there. And just the backups, how are they handled? Are they on the same storage? Are they somewhere else? Are they replicated off-site? Are they immutable, right? Are they, do you have a backup solution that ensures that those backups themselves can't be targeted? How far back do they go? Because we've seen that oftentimes they're in the system long before, they trigger anything. They're scoping out, they're checking things out. So having, a couple of days of snapshots might not be enough. Having 30 days of backups might not be enough. You might need more than that, to really, really recover some things to the point before they might have even gotten in. So, and just, everything that you guys were saying as far as resiliency, some of that falls into having plans and having process in place of who's going to do what when, making sure that people understand their roles. You've thought about it, you've tested it, you've documented it, of what the restore process looks like and how you might do that.
That's great, thanks. So I actually have a question. It's on the same subject, but it's more specific. But I think it might be a good thing. So I'm gonna launch on this next poll. But while I'm launching it, and I don't know if you brought this up, Brian, or Bob can answer on this, I guess. But this person wants to know that they've heard that there's no true way to know if Emotet has been eradicated. Do you feel comfortable saying you're back to normal? Like, how do you know you're back to normal? And I'm going to launch this thing while you answer that.
Yeah, I'll take that, because that's a very good question. As a matter of fact, so we were using some endpoint antivirus tools, two of them that, both detect malware, both eradicated, both detected this Emotet. So we set up the isolation. We were cleaning systems. Then we started looking at them, and there was I wouldn't say an argument, but like a conversation started up, and it got, kind of like people were picking teams. Like, I like this antivirus, I like that antivirus. Like, this one leaves remnants and artifacts of the Emotet, but it's disabled, but it leaves these artifacts that are still there, that we can see them. Do we feel comfortable putting this system back online and back into production? That these things are still there. And somebody made an analogy that I'll share with you guys. Like, it's like a car that was in a terrible wreck. You took it to your favorite auto body shop, looks all shiny and new now. Would you let your kid or your wife or a friend of yours, drive it across the country and think everything's going to be okay? That thing was in an awful accident. And also, beyond that analogy, like, things can be rehydrated, and these criminals, they collaborate with each other. If somebody sees some leftover artifact, they might just pick it up and use it. So we came to the decision, and people thought we thought we were kind of in the home stretch, and then I had to sit down with everybody and say, you know what? I think we're gonna have to like restore all these machines like back to a known good state, and that's going to be our moving forward. And people were like, oh my God, no, we have to get everything back online. So we really had to prioritize those systems that and those processes that were the most important to the business. In our case, order entry, EDI, things like that, of course, Active Directory, and we couldn't bring everything up at the same time. And that's where we found where ground zero was, because we found, say, a backup that was this date within this range, and we were good. And then we found something that was further back, and then we went, oh, yeah, this must be, where it started. And it was in there for a long time, and then had set up command and control, which we also saw, with our logs, looking at the firewall. There were some academics that were doing some research on like what those IP addresses were, and we were getting those lists and trying to work it from that end too. But ultimately, it became like in this instance, a restore. I also agree with what Brian said for the ransomware type of things. A SAN snapshot is the best. But again, how long's it been there? Your retention times, the storage, like you mentioned, you're right on with that. We're going to want to keep these even like infected, clean systems, but still, having artifacts, do more forensics, and maybe even they did some transactions, and we have to, merge that with our live systems. So all those things were right on, and that's what we experienced when we went through this thing.
That's great. Thanks, Bob. Anyone else want to chime in on this? So how do you know when you're clean issue? That's obviously a pretty critical problem.
Emotet's really hard. It's just one of those things where that thing has evolved and changed into all these different variants of Emotet, and it's a struggle. We had a client that was infected with Emotet, and at one point I remember we had bought every antivirus that was on the market, put it in the lab, and it was almost like one would find it, and then we would wait and watch, and this thing would morph itself and then evolve back into another variant. And it would hide itself, and Bob, perhaps you saw this, but it would hide itself as some obscure DLL. It would turn into an image. It would turn into an image file. It would turn into.
We saw zero-byte files, that sort of thing. DLLs, very tricky. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, know that you don't have it at all. Like, just go back to a clean state.
And it would create a new SHA hash, so it was hard to find that way. So it was just incredibly difficult to deal with. I mean, the guy that wrote that thing was probably, he was a true evil genius. It's just probably lives at a volcano. Who knows? But the guy, it's very hard. The only way to stop Emotet in our couple of instances was, start doing things in PowerShell and writing scripts and start running it after things that we've identified. But once it morphs and it leaves another dropper, and that evolves and morphs again, Emotet's just it's incredibly persistent. It's very hard. It's worse. It's like the coronavirus. It's one of those things that's so hard to stop.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we experienced too.
Okay. Thanks for that. So again, I think part of what we're trying to do is just raise awareness and talk. To me, part of the interesting, or not interesting, but reality of the story is this is now a board level conversation for a lot of people. We're talking to managers, talking to those people. So, and so when I talk to people who are non-technical board members, the question, I'm going to point this to Bert, like, how do they judge? If I'm a non-technical board member sitting in an organization or non-technical CEO, how do I get my hands around how safe am I and how resilient am I? Like, how ready am I for that stuff? Like, what advice do you give someone who's non-technical? Because it all sounds like mumbo jumbo to them, right? And there's all these products and there's all these toys and there's all this budget. So how do you come at that conversation effectively?
Well, it's going back to what I talked about earlier. Without going into technology, come up with a scenario and walk your people through those roles, and figure out, does everybody know their roles? Does everybody know what to do? There's really no need to go into what technology you're going to use to figure out if folks know what they're doing. And if folks don't know what they're doing, your risk goes up exponentially. There's really no need to talk about, we're going to use this backup program, we're going to use this restore process, or this antivirus, or this EDR, or any of those things to determine if people know what to do in the case of a breach. And that's how you know where your risk level is. If you don't know what you're doing in a particular scenario, your risk is extremely high. And then you need to practice, practice. I can't stress that enough. Practice makes perfect in everything. So this is not any different for any other scenario in life that you find yourself in. If you've never been in it and you haven't practiced it, you're going to fail. And then you got to correct it in order to lower your risk.
Yeah. It's funny, like we're talking the resilience thing. One of the main things I look for when I'm talking to a new customer who's got a problem is, what's the communication culture? Like, are they trying to obfuscate this from senior management, or senior management already in the room and talking? Are they trying to like that to me points to that problem of, if they've drilled it, if they've got a communication concept or whatever, if they're already in that, if they're in that mode of trying to obfuscate, I know it's going to be a bad day. Okay, let me get one more thing up here. So let's talk about, depth and breadth of breaches, right? So we talked about coming in, Steve, and finding out that there's a breach, but in the ER. Can you give us a little more perspective on, because that's the first thing that you want to understand, right? You know that there's a breach, there's a problem, but you need to know what data I've lost, how deep does the rabbit hole go? Like, how do you help customers figure out the depth and breadth of the breach?
I think the one thing is the question of, if they know who patient zero is and where it started. That's one of the key things that help us figure out what went down and what went wrong. And once they've isolated and they say, okay, we know that it was like Joe's machine over in this department, and they isolate that machine, and the forensics they're imperative, because the digital forensics on that particular box and what the threat actor did, it really opens up what's gone down and what's happened. And if you can resurrect that system and put that in a sandbox and start watching the behavior and trying to figure out how this guy's moving through an environment, or what he's doing to a particular machine from his command and control, it gives you a good understanding of what they're after or what they're trying to do. So really, I got to say, like from the beginning of what goes down is, if they understand what machine and what system perhaps is where this started from, it can lead to so many things. It can tell you where the vulnerability lies for them to get in, perhaps who clicked on something, some of the other activities of what they're trying to do in terms of moving laterally or pivoting. So the forensics and understanding where it started, is something that's incredibly helpful during an incident.
Good. Yeah, and in order to follow that trail, as Steve mentioned, you got to have logging, right? I can't stress that enough. If you have no logs, or if you're not collecting them somewhere, it's going to be nearly impossible to follow that trail. Even if you know where it started, without logs, you have no way of knowing how far it went.
Right. Good point.
The one other thing I should probably add that's been happening, and this is pandemic specific, is we just had a breach come in this morning. And, once again, they've isolated and found the machine. And they're like, well, how can you get access to it? So what they did is they stood up a protected segment of their network. And that segment is like their sandbox. So they know that they found patient 0. They can put that in there, and at that point, remotely, we can now do some forensics on that machine and figure out what's going down. Because timing is everything. And, sending a person on a plane right now or driving there it's not going to happen. So incident response and making sure that you can get access to something securely, that's something that you may want to consider. Put that segment together, isolate it, protect it in a way where nobody can touch it. But if you have to put something in there, you can do it securely with letting somebody else touch it to figure out what happened.
Yeah, maybe do that in advance, right? Get
Absolutely.
something already prepared so that if things happen, you're not scrambling to figure out how to isolate a network. You might need it to talk to the internet, but not anything else, right? There's certain parameters that we can help you kind of figure out what makes sense from that perspective. But
Right.
if you have it already, then you can instantly use it when these, for lots of different reasons. But if these types of situations occur, you're ready.
And the other reason, and Brian, that's a great statement, because I'll tell you, a lot of the threat actors now, when you take and you put their malware, you put their box they've infected in a sandbox, they know what's in a sandbox. They know when you create a VMware instance and they're going to spin up their infected machine in a test environment. You're dealing with somebody who's incredibly intelligent. So having that protected segment for that alone as well is just it's a big deal. So.
That's actually a very good point, Steve. A lot of the malware out there today can detect the VM or a sandbox and not do anything.
Oh, yeah.
They'll simply sit still until it's on a real machine.
Yeah. Emotet was a great one at that. It evolved into that, and it knew how to hide really well. So
we literally we call them like we put things in isolation, and we were just calling them like just pinholes in our in those DMZs or our intermediate isolated networks, and we could see differences in behavior, with the command and control, like using tools like Landshark and things like that, doing packet analysis to see what was going out, and the even blocking the sources, outside externally where they were going with, we would get this list that changed so frequently. It was pretty amazing. That wouldn't be good, maybe for like a day or two, and then there would be a new list, and just with hundreds of, there was no way you could block it doing that. I mean, you would try to do that to kind of mitigate it a bit more, but like that couldn't be your only, method of trying to eradicate it. It wouldn't work. They just keep moving and moving.
The way they do that, by the way, and it's an interesting thing. So if you go to the dark web, you'll see them advertise for bulletproof hosting sites. So these threat actors can go to, hosting facilities or the bad cloud guys where they could spin up a box and it costs them, $200 in Bitcoin per month. But what they can do is they have a box in a country where nobody cares. You can hack, spam, you can do whatever you want from that bulletproof hosting facility. And then they've enabled a technology called Fast Flux. And Fast Flux has a script that runs something in DNS where it changes the threat actor's IP every few seconds. So trying to block this, this rogue hostile IP is like pointless, because they know how to move and they know how to basically hide behind this Fast Flux technology. Once again, you're dealing with somebody who's figured a lot of stuff out in advance to go and attack somebody. So blocking is a tough thing to put together and try to use and to stop them. It just doesn't always work.
Definitely tough. So I think to me, one of the scary things, and Brian brought this up earlier, is how the new ransomware actors are, doing a few things. First of all, taking your data. Second of all, like spending some time getting through to your backups. In terms of some of these new ransomware attacks, I mean, how do you make a decision? And Brian, you talked this before, like that the backup is a good backup.
Yeah.
Like what does that process even look like to figure out, whether or not that backup is solid or it's already been compromised?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And you know, it's kind of Bob was mentioning, similar type of structures that we've seen is creating these, you know, these isolated networks and running tools within them to try to analyze for any type of nefarious activity, right? You know, whether that's you know, we've seen all different tools in use, you know, whether you're doing network level captures, running tools like Carbon Black or other tools, you know, that basically can scan as well as monitor, and having your firewall, you know, obviously logging and tuned to look for types of activity. You know, so we've seen it's a very iterative process, unfortunately, and it's time consuming, right? You know, you gotta restore one and scan it and hope it's good. And if it's not, maybe you go a day before, and then try that one. And then if that, you know, and your goal is to get your most recent good backup, right? You know, but finding that might be a bit of a needle in a haystack. So if you have good logging and you understand when things might have started, then it's much easier, right? You know, you can kind of start there and think of that. That's when they first entered in. So at some point between that and now, you know, we need, you know, you can kind of work that way, work up instead of work back. You know, which could be a method, because just because they're in, they might have spent, you know, a long time before they actually did anything else, just looking around, you know. So they might have gone in and 2 weeks later they started getting on other servers or something. So, you know, I think there's some pieces there that if you have data, it's going to help you try to isolate that. If you don't have data, it's going to be a long iterative process of trying to find that place that people feel comfortable, right? You know, because that's a big piece of it. And really, you know, it's the tough part is, you know, it could all happen again, right? You know, if you choose wrong, you know, and there's something there, you might be right back where you were. They can spawn it off again in a couple weeks, and you know, you're dealing with it all over again. It's a nightmare. It's groundhog. So, you know, I think from that perspective, it is a bit tricky. But there are some methods that you could take that, and if you've thought about that process of how you would do that, then when, you know, the other big thing we really haven't spoken about is time. Time is of the essence. There are some things that might not have been done yet when you first find out, and thinking about what steps you would take to isolate or lock things down helps you reduce the potential exposure, maybe stop it before it expands. There are some other things there that you can do, but the only way to do that is to get ahead of some of the things, right? So whether that's something got triggered, a log event, or something got alerted that you know happened. The second things happen, if you start to institute a plan, you might be able to limit, you know, what took place. Did it already affect everything, or maybe there's some areas there that you could still stop before the problem gets even worse.
Yeah, I literally, as soon as I saw that, I shut down my whole Commvault environment, and I learned that from the guys that got breached during the acquisition. It literally attacked their comm serve. They had no index of any of their. It took out the database.
Yeah, if you need to like reindex, you know, redo, you know, those are majorly time-consuming efforts. So, you know, though it's possible to, you know, get tapes and, you know, recatalog everything, the amount of time it takes is enormous, you know. So, you know, if you got to go that route, you know, it's things to think about, you know, but time is really important. But yeah, Bob shutting that thing down, I'm sure saved up countless hours.
I learned it from that's what happened to the other guys, and literally when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, let's click shut everything down.
Well, you had a plan, and that's the point, right? You had a couple things in your mind that if this happens, this is what I want to do first, right? You know, and again, if you're able to do that, you might stay, you know, kind of help reduce either the amount of time or just the exposure.
Yeah, I love that time is of the essence, and how true that is when you're in the middle of these things. Just as a the whole ransomware thing, to me, there's a philosophical part of this. Like you know, but you know, fundamentally, if someone wants to check for $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000, and I've got to spend $50,000 to stop that check going out, you know, I understand that maybe I'm incenting the wrong behavior in the long run, but you know, why not just pay the check? Why not just write the check? And I'm going to start with Steve on this, just because I know he's got a lot of strong feelings, but
yeah,
why not just write the check, Steve?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's people that pay it, and we negotiate it, and it's like doing a deal with the devil. You know, the minute you pay them and they know that you're good for the ransom, it won't be the first time, and they keep coming back. We were the third incident response company on a company that was breached, 3 times, and the 2 prior times, they went in, they negotiated, and I think after $3 million later on the third ransom, they decided this has got to stop because paying them, it just didn't go away. And, the new ransomware variants that are out there, and there's hundreds of them. If you go to the dark web and go to like Dream Market, go to Empire Market, go to all these different, there is hundreds of them that are out there, and they constantly evolve. So, paying them is a very difficult thing to do. I think it's not a good thing because it sends that message out, and they're going to come back. And the new variants that are out there, like Maze, they charge you twice. So you got to pay for the decryption key, and then you have to pay for the destruction of the data they stole from your network. And I've seen it, and I've seen one company just go through the pain, and they said, you know what, we're not going to pay them. We have good backups. We're not going to pay for the destruction of the data, and we're just going to call it as it is and say, hey, listen, you're not getting any money. And 2 weeks later, if you go to mazenews.top, or it's whatever the URL is now, they published 46 gigabytes of their clients' data. It's a CPA firm. So they've got audits that are out there. They've got all sorts of different information that belong to their clients. And for some reason, they had 170,000 records that are medical records. Why they had them, I have no idea. So threat actors out there, the minute you pay them, you send a message that they got you. And I just, once again, I think doing your due diligence and all the things we talked about with backups and Purple Team and tabletops, it's well worth it.
Yeah, I would just add that, I think there's a misconception that when you pay, you're okay. Like if you pay, you unlock your stuff, which is great, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't rebuild your entire environment. It doesn't mean that you should, restore from an earlier backup before this started. The only real benefit might be 2 things. One, you might get a more recent copy of that data. If you don't have good backups, your backups are old, or they were destroyed, you might not have a choice, right? There are some areas where getting that data back is important, but it's not going to stop you from having to go through the same process as you were going to go through, whether you pay or didn't pay. You still need to kind of get that data and get your systems back to a point where you're confident that they don't have any leftover artifacts, right? So it might be just getting the data, but rebuilding Windows all new and restoring the databases onto a fresh server or whatever that means, right? But I think there's this conception. I've been on a couple of these where, the owner of the company came on and said, I just want to pay. I want to get my business back. We'll just pay. And okay, pay, but we're still going to go through all this stuff. It's still going to be weeks of time. It's still, like the amount of effort that it doesn't go away just because you pay.
Here's a great example too. This just happened. So there was a company that was breached. There was a ransom out there. CFO of the company is adamant. Let's just pay them. I have to make payroll by Friday. Let's just pay them. We said, please don't pay them. We haven't figured out what's happened yet. We don't understand. I don't care. I want to pay them. So we won. She didn't pay. And then after figuring out what happened, there were 2 threat actors in this network. One moving, slow and low, very stealthy within the network. And then there was one loud and proud. This company got breached by 2 independent hackers, not knowing what each hacker was doing. So the first hacker locked up all the systems. Now, they got in through RDP. The second hacker came in 24 hours later and then re-encrypted the first hackers, all their encryption. So if they would have paid the second threat actor, all she would have decrypted is another ransom note to pay another hacker. So paying is just not a good solution. It's just, especially when you don't understand what just happened. To understand that you had 2 or 3 different individuals or hackers out there, that would have been a really, really embarrassing scenario for her. So,
that's very likely to happen too. The same exposure that you had that let the first one in is going to be the one that lets the second one in. So it's not like it's not a crazy thing to conceive of. Like you could actually have like the flu and a cold at the same time. You know, the flu might just make you feel so bad you don't have a cold. You know, like.
Yeah, and then get hit by a car, walk into the doctor's office. You know, so that's what it's like.
All right, so we're coming up on the top of the hour here. I want to thank you guys all. So I'm going to have a couple of last lightning round questions for everybody. While I'm doing that, if you have any questions or some, you please put them in, and we'll see if we can get them towards the end here. So just quick, I'm going to go down the list here, but quick answer: top technology people should focus on to stop breaches. Brian, you're on the top of my list. So what's your thought on top technology people should look at to stop breaches?
Stop breaches,
Yeah.
Stopping breaches is tough. So I mean, obviously, you're dealing with a lot of stuff on the endpoint side and the perimeter, right? Those are the areas they're getting in. But I think education is probably the biggest thing. I'll leave you with that.
User awareness, good answer.
Yes.
Bert, what do you think? Top technology to stop breaches?
Anti-malware, DLP, and again, logs. And not just logs that you collect and forget about, logs that you set up use cases against to create alerts, to let you know early on what's happening, will give you the biggest opportunity of stopping the breach early on the attack chain and being able to prevent bigger damage.
Awesome, thanks. Steve, what do you think? Top technology people should have to stop breaches?
Next generation antivirus. Spend the money. It's expensive, but it's good. The Emotech question made me think of that because, once again, next gen is what figured it out and found most of it. The signature-based stuff was passe.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Steve. Bob, what do you think? Top technology suggestion?
What Steve said, the next generation is going to be behavior-based and not pattern-based like the old stuff. The other would be privilege access. That's how this thing really got moving. Once it grabbed some credentials, and also controlling the credentials on the endpoints as well. And I'll say the user training. Don't click on the link. You don't get it. If they do click on the link, you at least isolated it with the PAM and the antivirus, and you put out a little brush fire as opposed to it burning down the forest.
Excellent. Good advice. Thanks, Bob. Okay, last lightning round question. Okay, so top thing people should be doing now to be prepared for that inevitable breach. What's the top of the list? And Bob, I'll start with you this time so you can go. What's the top thing you'd say people should be doing to be prepared for that breach?
Okay, securing that incident response. As Bert was talking about, practicing. Having your backups tested and knowing that you have those things in place. Also having the correct level of support with your antivirus. Like if you have antivirus but you're on the standard version and someone's going to get back to you at level 1 in 4 hours, not good enough. You have to have a TAM. You have to have somebody that's going to advocate for you. Even with these vendors that you've purchased these tools from.
Great, thanks, Bob. Steve, what do you think? Top thing to get ready?
Look at your insurance policy. Call your insurance agent. You make sure you're covered for everything, and ask all the hard questions, and make sure that they have it built into that policy. Second thing, get a lawyer that understands how to deal with a breach.
Yep.
And then third thing, a marketing company. Understand if you have to announce, how you do it gently.
That's great advice. Bert?
I mean, Steve and Bob cover mostly everything, but I'll restate it. Engage and retain an incident response partner. Don't let the incident dictate your Google search to find who you're going to call. Do your research ahead of time. Identify several IR partners, or if you already have a company you trust, ask them if they have an IR program, and make sure you have a retainer in place. Don't wait for the last minute.
Great advice, Bert. Thanks, Brian.
I would just say, think of the first things you would do, the order of things that you need to do, and remember that time is really important. So if you practice those things, create a process of what you're going to do, have a game plan. And once you have that, when things take place, you're gonna either contain it faster, recover faster. All those things are possible if you have a plan. If you're creating the plan on the fly, it won't work as well.
Right. Well, that's great. Well, thanks guys for all this today. If I didn't get to your questions, we'll get to you after the session. Something we want to announce. So in the light of this stuff, so Gotham has been doing a lot of IR stuff, a lot of it with Secure and other partners, which is terrific. We're actually announcing today an IR retainer program from Gotham. So there's a couple of goals we wanted to have with that. We wanted it to be affordable. It's under $20,000. It's got blocks of remediation time and response time. It's got IR time. So that's all fantastic. And it's also got a very effective way of rolling over year. So if you don't have an incident, which is good for you, we'll find some way of doing that. So because you're on this session today, though, we're gonna give $1,000 discount to each customer on this session towards that retainer. So I guess it's under $20,000, and you're getting and you get a retainer, and you get a retainer, and you get so so if you're interested in that, we'll obviously be reaching out to you and getting you the details on that program. So thank you to my panelists for all joining today. You guys all did great. You're the stars, and thank you for all coming. And look for that follow up in the email. Thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Dick.
Bye.